Hi everyone, welcome to Watercolor Painting with Miss Yvonne. Today we're going to be doing a landscape. So what we have for supplies are watercolors, of course. Now these are the liquid watercolor paints, but don't be afraid to use the regular tabs. This will work just fine. You also need paper towels, and this for today I have 3 different paint brushes. I'm using a number 2. This one's going to be for more detail work. Then I have this large round number 8 brush and a flat number 8 brush. Now this is, we're not going to use this brush, this flat one, until the very end. We have our 2 cups of water, one for clean water, one's our dirty water. I have a pencil because we're going to draw just one little line, but you do need it nonetheless. Now you notice that the paper that I have, I've put the blue artist tape on this one. The reason is, one, this will allow you to extend the life of the pad of paper that you get, but also because this is just practice, so we're not going to be using too much space. I have it taped up in the middle like that, so that way you can just cut it down the middle like I have already here. So now you have 2 canvases to work with. The other thing that I brought today that I haven't used so far, and I've talked about it, is a hair dryer. This is going to help us really work through this painting, because we are going to be using a lot of paint for this landscape. We're going to be filling up the whole thing with paint, and we're going to be doing lots of layers. So I brought this to speed up the process. I'm going to be using it on my settings on cool for the hair dryer, and if you want to push that cold blast button when you paint, that's okay. You don't need hot air for that. Okay, so using one of the half sheets that you cut out from the hole, you're going to take your pencil, and what we're doing today is a landscape of a mountain scene at night. So what we want is, we want to go all the way down to this lower section of the paper, and this is where our mountain range is going to be. We're going to use our pencil, and we're just going to draw a nice little squiggly line across to show like a little mountain range, and that's it. We're going to paint this last because the coloring is going to be dark to light down here, so it's going to look like the sun maybe just set maybe 20 minutes before, and that the dark night sky is, we got this gradient that we're going to be creating. And at the end, we're going to paint this nice and dark with a gray or a black. I'm going to use the gray for that. The night sky that we're doing is going to be a blue color, going from this steel blue, gray, black up here, and then we're going to be working our way down to a really light baby blue, almost white color, and then it's we got this mountain range that's going to be in stark contrast to it. I'm going to be starting off with this number 8 rounded brush to do the gradients, and then we're going to be using the thin number 2 paintbrush, this one here, for the star detailing with the white paint, and this flat number 8 brush we're also going to be using for the stars. So we actually won't use these 2 until the very end, and we're going to do the majority of the painting with this round number 8 brush. So for a painting like this, you really want to test your colors before you really begin to work with them. I've laid out a few different colors of blue in addition to the indigo, primary blue, and violet that we're going to be using for this painting. And it's nice to kind of plan out what coloring that you want to have for this painting. So I'm just going to just kind of show you the different colors that we want to achieve with this. So we've got this, I believe this one's a cobalt blue. Oh no, it's a Prussian blue. And notice how different and the different saturations of each color looks like. So we want to make sure that when we do the gradients and mixing the blue and the black, that we get a nice change from dark to light. So I mean, we're definitely going to use this one towards the bottom. And let's look at this primary blue here. Yeah, so I would be using these two towards the bottom and then these two towards the top of the paper. Now look at, let me clean off my paintbrush really quick. Looking at this indigo color, yeah. So the indigo would be the topmost color, and to get this color you would mix blue and black. And with these two colors are kind of more, you know, the primary blue color, so you would just use less paint to get these, to get this lighter color, and you would mix white and a little bit of black, so you kind of get a gray to get this like periwinkle color here, because it's mixed with a little bit of gray. So keeping that palette in mind, we're also going to use violet, which I'm going to use towards the top when we get blue and a little bit of black. So we're going to mix that in on these different hues of blue, purple, and black to get the color, to get the effect that we want. In watercolor, there's two theories. You can start using the lighter colors of your color palette and then adding the darker colors on top later. That's the best way for beginners. If you are a lot more confident in your abilities to do watercolor, you can also try to start with the darks, the more saturated colors, and then kind of lightening it up after. But I highly suggest, for the sake of learning, that we start with the lighter colors first and we work our way up to, you know, practicing and building and you know, creating different hues and gradients as you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this lighter blue, and we're using the wet on dry technique. I'm going to start from the bottom here and just lightly brush, working my way up. I feel like I have too much paint there. There we go. Now don't worry about it feeling like it's too light on the bottom. That's kind of what we want. We want the top layer of, or the top section of this paper to be the night sky. This is more like the sunset portion. And we're using a wet on dry technique down here because we don't want the blue to bleed down into the mountain range, even though we are going to be covering this in either dark gray or black. This is so that you can practice staying within the lines using watercolor, because that can be challenging. So working our way up. You don't have to go all the way up, but we do want to get at least to the halfway point of the paper using this lighter blue color. And then, let's see. Let's get a little bit more. I'm going to work up a little bit higher because using the next technique, I want to be able to have the paper prepped for the wet on wet technique. I don't know if you can see it with the angle of the camera, but I do have about up to here with water. I'm going to kind of wave it around, see if you can see the glistening of the water. And I'm doing that so that I can add the next color going forward. Let's see. Which one am I going to use? Yes. Okay, I'm going to use the primary blue for that. I'm going to mix it with some water. Okay, and then about here, about halfway, I'm going to add this blue, but I'm going to allow it to bleed into the bottom layer that we have going on here, and I'm not adding too much color for this first layer, but we will add later and deepen and make this color look really, really rich. But we do want it to bleed into this cobalt blue that's down here, so I am adding a little bit of water to kind of blend these two together using that dabbing technique. And so we got that kind of gradient scheme going. And then using a little bit more water, dragging that color upward as well as the water, so we can add some more color. So I'm going to go for this Prussian blue here. It's not quite as dark, but we're getting there. That's kind of what we want. And I'm just blotting the color, and you see how it starts to expand out, and that's what we want this color to do with the wet on wet technique, because it bleeds into the layer below it, and you can just drag that color upward. And we have enough water on this paper, so you don't have to add too much more. And then I'm gonna go with this, what is it called? Ultramarine blue here. And get that nice dark color. And it's okay when you're painting with the blue tape that you have, that you kind of go over the edges. The point of the blue tape is that the, when you lift that blue tape up, the edges are gonna come off clean. Okay, so that's the first layer, and then what I'm going to do next, because I want to get a move on with this painting, so I'm actually going to use my hair dryer. I have it set on cool, and I'm going to turn it on to low and push down on this cold button as I'm drying it off to, we don't need hot air on this paper. If you need help from your parent, just ask them, okay? So I'm going to start that right now. Okay, so as you can see that the gradient is showing up pretty well here. My paper is pretty dry. There's a little bit of bubbling, but that's okay. At the end, when you frame it, or when it's dry, you can put books on top of it, and it'll work out okay. So the next layer I want to do, I kind of want to leave the bottom layer relatively alone, and I want to work starting from the top layer going down. So what I want to do is I want to bring in some violet actually, and I want to put just like a thin layer of violet starting from the top and working down. And I'm using the wet on dry technique for this. And I'm going to be just adding water as I go. So this is going to get you a more kind of, maybe not realistic night sky, but it's going to deepen and enrich in the colors that you're using. Now, notice how the edges of my brush strokes look really jagged. So I'm actually taking some water and dabbing at the edges to kind of allow it to kind of flow in a more gradient kind of way. so that way you don't have like these like strong brush strokes that are here. And you can go down a little bit further with the purple. That's okay, because remember this is a night sky. And we're going to be adding on another layer here. Now I believe it was this medium blue color that I'm going to start adding over here. And one of the last layers that we're going to do is going to be that black color. So you know, no need to worry about that just yet. And I know it looks really light right now, but that's okay, because that's what watercolor painting, you know, it is. We start off with a light layer, and then we work and build color, and it builds, you know, depth and texture. And that's what you're kind of learning, guys. Okay, on to this next lighter blue layer. Oh, don't mind those noises, they're doing work right outside the window. And instead of adding color, I'm just bringing these, the little excess color that we created on this this quarter right here. I'm just dragging that color down instead. So I'm not going to do too much more on that. I want to go ahead and use my hairdryer again. So here we go. So we're just gonna keep doing this, guys. We're just gonna keep adding layer upon layer of, you know, going from dark to light. I'm gonna start with this gray coming up here. Now we're gonna go a little bit more bold with the dark color over here. And what we can do also is, now I'm seeing that the way that it looks, I'm not 100% happy with that. So I'm going to start mixing a little bit of blue in with this gray. That actually looks like indigo. So I'm going to actually dip into this indigo color here instead of going full gray. And I'm going to add that, the topmost layer, because it still has that nice blue color to it. But we've got the deep, you know, not earthy tones, sorry. It is an earthy tone. Gray is an earthy tone, but you know, this makes the night sky a lot more dark from the top. And that's what we're aiming for. Now what you just saw me do there with the back and forth brush strokes was you saw me blending the colors that we just put on the paper. And if you notice that with the night sky, that's usually how the coloration of the sky changes, is from dark to light, and it does it gradually. Initially it looked really patchy, but using that back and forth brush strokes, just by using excess water rather than using any additional paint coloring, is what brought that to, what helps to create that look. I'm going to go ahead and use, notice also one of the things that you may be seeing on your paper, and this is with lower quality watercolor paper, or if you're overworking your papers, you notice these little, they're almost like cotton balls, but they're like when you wash your clothes too much. But in reality, this is just from using a lot of water and overworking my paper. This is common with lower quality watercolor paper, as well as just not being familiar with like exactly how much water you're using, if the watercolor paints that you're using aren't of high quality. So that's something to think about. It's okay, because once it dries, you can kind of gently use a paper towel, very gently kind of brush those off. I'm gonna go ahead and use my hair dryer again, because I like the way that this is looking, and I want to begin work on the stars. Okay, so we're gonna do that right now. Just gonna add a little bit more to the very, very top. And I'm not using a lot of water on this time. I'm gonna go a little bit darker. This is what happens also with watercolor, is that as you work with it, the even when it dries and you feel like you've used a lot of paint, the paint will actually come out a lot lighter when you're finished, and that's okay. But I do want to add another layer to this to give it that deeper night sky look, because we want the stars to come out and point out as when we add them in at the end. So I'm going to go a little bit darker, and notice how nice and rich that indigo color comes out when you're adding on this like third, fourth layer that we're on. So this is like the nice, cool thing about watercolor too, is how how you can kind of create depth and make things look really, really intense, but also really soft and delicate too. And so at this point, I'm actually just adding water rather than paint, and I'm kind of dragging this paint down a little bit. I don't want to drag it too much. I'm going to keep doing this, like a little bit of adding darker layers and hair dryer, and using the hair dryer, pardon me. I'm going to add some dark layers, use the hair dryer, and kind of keep going till I get the desired effect that I want. I'm going to do it now. Okay, as you can see, I have allowed my paper to dry or used my hair dryer. The main thing about this part is you do need your paper to be dry in order to begin this next step. I am using white watercolor paint. Actually, if you have it in a tube like this, you can also kind of squish it around and mix it up a little bit so that the ingredients in here do mix together. So as you can see, I do have like the separation of that oil coming out. So I'm just using the tube itself to mix that color up and get it going, because I haven't actually used this white one in a very long time. So we are going to get the small number 2 paintbrush. So there's 2 ways to paint stars on this part. So the one way is to take a small thin paintbrush like this and do individual dots. And the second technique is to use a flat edge paintbrush, and what you do is you take your thumb. Let me see if you can see this. I'm gonna get up here kind of close. So what you do is you hold the paintbrush like this, and you use your thumb, and you glide it directly across the very top, and you just kind of allow it to flick. And when you have paint and water on a paintbrush like this, it's actually gonna create a bunch of little flecks of paint on your paper, and that's how you're gonna create a night sky painting very quickly. So you're not doing 1,000 individual dots. You just go shoop like that, and then boom, you've got a nice spray of stars on your paper. So doing that, I'm gonna not use that dirty water. I'm only gonna use the clean water for this. Okay, I'm gonna get some paint on my paintbrush. Now you may need to try this a couple of times to see if it works correctly. Let's see, I've got a practice paper here that I was using earlier, so I can actually practice on this and show you a little bit. So I've got let's get that in focus. I've got my paintbrush here, and I'm gonna just flick it. And you see how some stars are flecking across the night, this black part right here. So you can do that. You probably want to use a little bit less water and more paint. Let's see. There we go. So yeah, practicing is going to help you figure out the mixture of paint to water ratio. So you see how, sorry about that. So you see how now you got a bunch of little white dots on your paper and it looks like stars. So that's the technique I'm going to use. I'm actually going to do that first. I'm going to get more. I will wet my brush, but not a lot. I do want more paint than I do water on my paintbrush. And using my thumb, I'm going to, flick stars. Across my night sky. Now I do have a little streak there. That's okay. Don't worry about it. We are practicing, we are learning, and if you make a mistake, even if you've been doing this for years, it's okay. It's not going to ruin your painting, I promise. Just want a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that there. I do have paint on my fingers, that's okay. We get dirty while painting. And then the rest of the paint, I will go ahead and put some more dots. Like I do want to paint maybe some bigger stars. And I can do that by just simply taking a thinner paintbrush and putting little dots over the places that I want more stars in. You can also do one of those little, do a star and have, the little lines coming through like that. Okay. You can use different size round brushes to create bigger stars, smaller defined stars. It's up to you. You can even have an area that has more stars than other parts. Obviously down here you're not going to have too many stars because that's going to be like the lighter part where the sun is, so you want the stars to kind of go up higher in your painting. If you know what constellations look like, you can paint your favorite constellation as well. Okay? If you know a lot about astronomy or you're really into that, you can do that as well and kind of pay homage to your favorite constellation. Okay, so for me, that's going to be good enough. Now the very last thing that we're doing is this mountain range. Now this is going to be a lot more saturated than the layering we did initially here. We want this to be very dark. We want to use a lot of paint and less water. So we are going to use that wet on dry technique. We're not prepping the paper. Notice that as I was painting, you can kind of see that I did go outside the lines with the blue paint, and when I was painting the sky. That's why I wanted us to do the light blue colors first, and then we can add dark later, because we can easily cover that with black paint. So that's why this technique is really good. So what I'm doing is I'm using black watercolor paints, and I'm gonna use the wet on dry technique and paint in the lines. We're covering up the blue. Because we do want the paint to spread, but we do want it to be a nice stark contrast to the rest of the painting here. I am going to use my hair dryer on this part. I'm going to layer this with gray so that it's not so flat of a solid black color. It's going to have a little bit of depth to it. Oh, maybe, I'm not sure. We'll see, that's the goal. The goal is to have a little bit of depth even with the mountain range right here, but that's okay. Okay, so the last part that you would do for a painting like this is you would pull up the tape. I'm not going to pull up from the bottom just now because that's still a little bit wet, but I will take from, what's nice about this tape is with painter's tape is that it really does do a good job like protecting the paper. But let's see, I'm going to just tear that a little bit. I'm just going to pull up from across the paper first. The way I tape this. Sorry. Okay, so you do want to be gentle with it still. Okay, because even though you know, you did a good job taping it down, pulling the tape up might pull some of the paper off, and that's something that you want to make sure that you avoid, especially if you you know, your painting's still wet like this one is. So I'm going to do my best to pull up the painter's tape, especially from the bottom here. But as you can see, we've got a nice clean, okay, good. Okay. As you can see, the paint is looking really nice. We've got a nice, beautiful, clean border here. Okay, I'm going to be really careful here. Okay, wonderful. Ah, look at that. I said I was going to be careful, and I wasn't. Okay. So there we have it. We have a night mountain landscape, night scene. I really hope that you guys continue to practice with the watercolors and come up with some really cool designs. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time.